In February 2026, the United States and Israel launched a joint preemptive strike against Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure. They called it Operation Epic Fury. Soon after, Israel launched Operation Eternal Darkness into Lebanon. The volume of firepower was staggering. Within a single 10-minute window, Israeli fighter jets dropped approximately 160 heavy munitions onto targets deeply embedded in Lebanese commercial and residential zones. On a tactical level, these operations hit their marks. The strike successfully assassinated Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, directly in Tehran, while severely degrading substantial portions of Iran's conventional naval and air infrastructure. Simultaneously, the strikes dismantled Hezbollah's high-level command structure, eliminating critical intelligence centers and top officials like the personal secretary to Hezbollah's leadership. Washington and Tel Aviv broadcasted A's decapitation strikes and destroyed targets to the world. They pointed to the smoking craters as proof of absolute Western military supremacy. But destroying targets is not the same as winning a war. While the kinetic strikes generated headlines, they masked a strategic failure that was already pulling the region into a devastating stalemate. The initial 10 minutes of concentrated aerial bombardment gave way to the punishing reality on the ground, a continuous 2.5-year war of attrition stretching across multiple fronts. This map shows the topographical reality of southern Lebanon. Despite the IDF detonating border villages to create an 8 to 10-kilometer kill zone, they failed to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River. Entrenched fighters launched 200 rockets into Israel daily. At the same time, Iran leveraged its own asymmetric advantages. Rather than fighting the U.S. military head-on, the IRGC deployed swarms of fast attack craft and naval mines to completely close the Strait of Hormuz, instantly paralyzing 20% of the world's traded oil. The United States and Israel applied overwhelming kinetic force, yet found themselves stuck. Their heavy bombardments failed to force capitulation, turning tactical superiority into a strategic void. In this chaotic environment, a separate conflict raged online. Disinformation spread rapidly, most notably a viral claim by former State Department official Lawrence Wilkerson, asserting that Iranian forces had cut off IDF supply lines, leaving 120,000 Israeli soldiers starving. This chart clarifies the 120,000 metric. It actually counts evacuated Israeli citizens and mobilized reservists. Neither are starving. Tragically, the UN uses this exact figure for Palestinians facing severe famine in Gaza. The video falsely projected this suffering onto the Israeli military. The Israeli military is not starving. Yet this fabricated narrative successfully took hold across open-source platforms, preying on a real underlying truth. Israel is buckling under severe internal pressure. 30 months of continuous high-intensity warfare requires massive financial capital. This sustained defense expenditure has forced the government into massive deficits, pulling funds away from infrastructure and triggering profound investor panic. During periods of intense escalation in the spring of 2026, the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange experienced severe contractions. The blue-chip TA35 index dropped 3.3% in a single trading day, its largest decline since the war began. At the same time, the shekel weakened significantly against the US dollar. This currency depreciation drove up the cost of imported goods, pushing inflation higher and squeezing middle-class households with exorbitant mortgage rates. A severe credit crunch followed.
Commercial banks raised interest rates on commercial loans to offset the risk of defaults, strangling small and medium-sized businesses whose workforce was already thinned by mobilization. This economic trauma reignited deep societal polarization. Thousands of citizens returned to the streets of Tel Aviv, gathering at Habima Square to protest the government. Over 75% of Israelis held Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu directly responsible for the strategic intelligence failures of October 2023. Political opposition figures mobilized quickly, demanding state inquiries. But the most immediate threat to the governing coalition was the draft. After the Supreme Court ended military draft exemptions for ultra-Orthodox seminary students, the IDF began issuing notices. Hardline coalition partners threatened to immediately topple the government if these exemptions weren't protected. The country is operating under an extended wartime posture that masks deep structural vulnerabilities. Israel's survival now depends less on defeating external adversaries and more on preventing a total internal economic and political fracture. Seeking to break the Iranian stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz and project American resolve, President Trump unilaterally announced a new maritime initiative in May 2026 called Project Freedom. The plan was a massive application of force. The U.S. military intended to use guided missile destroyers, over 100 aircraft, and 15,000 personnel to forcibly escort commercial vessels through the strait, daring Iran to initiate a direct confrontation. But the operation lasted less than 36 hours before it was abruptly halted. It didn't fail because of Iranian naval strikes. Instead, it failed because Saudi Arabia and Kuwait explicitly vetoed the operation. The U.S. military relies entirely on its Gulf partners for critical access and basing rights. Infuriated that they were not consulted, Riyadh formally informed Washington they would not permit U.S. military aircraft to operate from Prince Sultan Air Base. Both Saudi Arabia and Kuwait went further, completely blocking the U.S. military from transiting through their sovereign airspace to support the mission. Riyadh recognized that a forced opening of the Strait of Hormuz would trigger immediate Iranian retaliation against their desalination plants and oil refineries. They chose to preserve a fragile détente with Tehran over a U.S. military victory that could leave the Arabian Peninsula in ruins. By actively denying the U.S. military the infrastructure required to wage war, these Gulf states proved they no longer viewed themselves as compliant vassals. They prioritized their national economic survival over Washington's geopolitical demands. Faced with the sudden loss of indispensable regional airspace and basing rights, the U.S. president was forced to stand down his naval escorts. The American military apparatus was effectively grounded by its own allies. With military coercion failing, a conflict entered a delicate diplomatic phase at the Islamabad talks. Pakistan, having demonstrated strategic independence and maintaining ties to both Washington and Beijing, served as the only mutually acceptable mediator between the U.S. and Iran. The marathon negotiations ultimately collapsed over intractable demands. Iran refused to dismantle its domestic uranium enrichment capabilities, viewing the program as its ultimate deterrent. More critically, Iran refused a ceasefire that only applied to U.S. hostilities, linking any truce to a total halt of the war in Lebanon. The operational environment in 2026 proved that an advanced military apparatus can level city blocks, but overwhelming kinetic force alone is no longer capable of forcing capitulation or resolving a crisis. In a multipolar Middle East, tactical destruction only deepens the